Welcome in, everyone, to our deep dive today. And we're going back a whole century with this one. We're talking about the Reiterverein Büderich,
Wow.
a German equestrian club. And, you handed me this book. It's their 100th anniversary celebration book. And I'm already seeing that this is so much more than just horses. This is really a window into how this small club navigated some of the biggest moments of the 20th century.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see how their story is so connected to these major world events, from World War I to even the pandemic.
Right.
Talk about local history with global connections.
Yeah, okay, so let's paint a picture here.
Aha.
It's the 1920s. Germany is recovering from a devastating war. The economy's in shambles, and parts of the country are still under occupation.
And in this really difficult context, you have this small village, right, Büderich, only about 4,500 people. And there are these 7 young men who find this common ground in their love of horses, and they decide to establish the Reiterverein in 1922. But this isn't all, parades and fancy riding. This is pure equestrian dedication.
It sounds like they were serious about it, too. They had this strict training manual. They were following the HDV-12. They were practicing on any land they could find, and they were even bartering for supplies.
Oh, absolutely. Resourcefulness was key back then.
Mhm.
Remember, cars weren't common yet, so horses were still essential, especially in a village like Büderich.
And they didn't stop at just, basic riding either. They held their first horse race in 1924, and then a year later, their first tournament. And then get this, in 1928, they even formed a fanfare group. So picture these guys riding with a full brass band.
You can really tell they valued that camaraderie and festivity, especially during those tough times. And speaking of festivity, we can't forget about the Schützenfest.
Right. The Schützenfest. So for anyone who's not familiar, this is a massive German festival full of parades, marksmanship, contests, music, and basically the whole town comes together. It's a huge part of life in Büderich. And the Reiterverein's own statutes actually mention participation in it.
Although it looks like their involvement might have been delayed because of the Belgian occupation at the time, it really shows you how global politics could directly affect a local club.
For sure. But they didn't let those obstacles stop them. By the 1930s, they're starting to make a name for themselves in regional and provincial tournaments.
Oh.
I'm curious, did they have a lot of local support? Was it like a real it takes a village kind of situation?
Oh, absolutely. There's this incredible sense of community throughout their story. One of their top writers, Tony Holtz, actually trained on his family's land. And they even had a former police writing instructor who was guiding them.
That's fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing to see that level of commitment, both from the writers and the people around them.
Yeah, but unfortunately their momentum is cut short by the rise of Nazi Germany and, World War II casts a huge shadow over everything and the Reiterverein wasn't immune to these changes.
And that brings us to a real turning point in their story. When the war breaks out, horses are requisitioned for the war effort, and civilian riding basically comes to a standstill. In fact, none of the Büderich horses even came back from the war.
Yeah, it's a detail that really hits home, doesn't it? These horses were more than just animals. They were companions and symbols of freedom. And to lose them all like that must have been devastating.
It seems like an impossible loss to come back from.
Yeah.
But I'm looking ahead in this book, and it looks like the Reiterverein doesn't just disappear. They find a way to keep going.
Exactly. And their return to public life at the 1949 Schützenfest is incredibly symbolic. It marks this new beginning, a testament to their resilience. And they start recruiting new members, they resume those social gatherings and the equestrian activities that make them who they are.
And then in 1952, they get a new standard to replace the one lost during the war. It's almost like they're saying, we're still here, and we're carrying on our traditions. It's powerful.
Yeah. It really is. And, as we move into the next few decades, Germany's going through this post-war economic boom, and there are these rapid societal shifts. I wonder how all of that impacted the Reiterverein. Were they still competing during this time?
Well, it looks like they were, but there's also a noticeable change. We see them becoming more and more involved in the Schützenfest.
Interesting. So as Germany is rebuilding and modernizing, did the role of horses in everyday life start to decline? Is that maybe why the Reiterverein's focus shifted more towards the Schützenfest? It would be fascinating to explore if this was their way of preserving tradition in a world that was changing so quickly.
That's a really good point. Maybe it was a way for them to adapt while holding on to their core values. And they really embraced their role in the festival. They were participating in the parades. They're upholding the tradition of St. Martin and his heralds. It's almost like the Schützenfest becomes even more central to their identity.
Yeah, and even with the shift towards the festival, they're still very much involved in the equestrian world. In 1979, they introduced this new competition called the Ringstechen, which takes place at the Schmidt riding stable.
Wait, hold on. Explain that. What is ringstechen?
Okay, so imagine this. You're on horseback. You're galloping toward this small ring that's hanging in the air, and you have to spear that ring with a lance. It takes incredible precision, a steady hand, and real partnership between you and your horse.
Wow, that sounds intense. It's clear that they're not just, riding in parades. They're still pushing their skills and challenging themselves.
And they're not afraid to have some fun either. They even participate in the Jux Parade, which is this lighthearted comedic procession that's part of the Schützenfest. So they're competing, they're parading, and they're even clowning around a bit.
Sounds like they found a good balance between the serious and the fun aspects of their club.
Yeah, they really have. And as we get into the period from 1991 to 2010, we see them celebrating a lot of milestones, both for the club itself and for individual members. There's this real sense of tradition and community that shines through.
Yeah, I'm seeing tons of anniversaries and celebrations in this book. Their 70th anniversary in 1992 was a big one. They had this huge party at the Eichheuer farm, and a member named Joseph Schumacher gave them back an old fanfare banner from the club's early days. That must have been special.
Oh, absolutely. A beautiful gesture. And then for their 75th anniversary in 1997, they start this new tradition, an annual barbecue at the Schneider's family home. It sounds lovely.
And they always find a way to keep things interesting. In 2006, a guy named Peter Verhaan applies to join the club, but guess what? He writes his application on a beer mat in the middle of the Schützenfest.
Talk about making an impression. It really sums up their blend of tradition and lightheartedness.
And speaking of tradition, they introduced this new role in 2012, the Fahnenjunker. It's basically a younger member who's tasked with taking care of the club's standard. It's like passing the torch to the next generation.
A great way to honor their history while looking to the future.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground from their early years to their many celebrations. But there's still more to uncover. I know they don't own their own horses directly anymore, so I'm curious how they managed to participate in the Schützenfest and other events.
Well, they've adapted by forming strong partnerships with local stables. For example, they've had this close relationship with Reitstall Schmitz for almost 30 years.
That's incredible. So they're finding ways to keep their equestrian traditions alive, even as circumstances change. And remember that intense ringstechen competition? Well, in 2008, they actually returned to competitive riding, and they participate in the Nieuwsfirth Ringstechen Championship.
Talk about coming full circle. And then in 2019, they honor one of their own Jochen Wierichs, who had been with the club for 66 years. He receives this medal, the first Salmreferscheid Dijk commemorative medal, recognizing his decades of dedication.
Oh, 66 years. That's amazing.
It's a reminder that the Reiterverein is made up of these individual stories, each one contributing to their rich history.
So they're upholding traditions, they're adapting to new realities, they're embracing partnerships, they're honoring their members. It seems like they found a way to keep that equestrian spirit alive.
Absolutely. And that leads us to a question for you, dear listener. What does the Reiterverein Büderich's century-long story tell us about the relationship between tradition and community and the appeal of equestrianism in a changing world?
That's a great question. I mean, their story really reflects these broader changes that were happening in Germany and around the world. They've seen wars, economic booms, technological advancements, and yet they've maintained their core identity.
It speaks to their resilience and their adaptability. They haven't been afraid of change, but they've also held on to what's important to them, their love of horses, that sense of community, those traditions that connect them to their past.
Yeah, it really is. And, as we move into the next few decades, Germany's going through this post-war economic boom, and there are these rapid societal shifts. I wonder how all of that impacted the Reiterverein. Were they still competing during this time?
Well, they were, but there are some changes. We see them getting more involved in the Schützenfest, much more involved.
Interesting. So as Germany is rebuilding and modernizing, did the role of horses in everyday life start to decline? Is that maybe why the Reiterverein's focus shifted more towards the Schützenfest? It would be fascinating to explore if this was their way of preserving tradition in a world that was changing so quickly.
Yeah, it's possible. Think about it. As Germany modernized, horses just weren't as important for everyday life. Cars and tractors and new technologies started to take over. So the Reiterverein might have seen the Schützenfest as a way to hold on to those traditions and that connection to their heritage.
It's like they're evolving with the times, but they're not letting go of what makes them unique. And their involvement in the Schützenfest is pretty impressive. They're providing mounted officers, They're upholding the tradition of St. Martin and his heralds, and they're even adding some humor to the festivities with the Jux Parade.
Yeah. It shows their commitment to the community and their willingness to actively participate in the cultural life of Büderich. But at the same time, their dedication to equestrianism doesn't go away.
Right, we can't forget about the ring stitching competition. I'm
Uh-huh.
still trying to picture this. You're on horseback, galloping towards this tiny ring, and you have to spear it with a lance. It sounds so difficult.
It requires so much skill, precision, and trust between the horse and rider. And remember, they introduced this competition in 1979 at a time when their focus was shifting more and more towards the Schützenfest.
It really shows that they weren't content with just parades and celebrations. They were still pushing themselves equestrianly and finding ways to challenge their skills. Which makes me wonder, if they weren't owning horses during this period, how are they even training and competing?
Well, that's a great question, and this is where their ability to adapt really shines through. They started forming these partnerships with local stables. It's something they still do today, in fact. Their relationship with Reitstall Schmitz goes back almost 30 years.
Wow, that's amazing. So they find ways to keep those equestrian traditions alive, even if it means changing how they operate. It really speaks to their resourcefulness and their commitment to collaboration.
Absolutely. And it also speaks to the strength of those community bonds that we talked about earlier. Remember, in the early days, they relied on support from families like the Holtz family, who let them train on their land. Well, now we see them building these long-term partnerships with local stables, further solidifying their place in the community.
It seems like partnership and collaboration were key to their survival, especially in a world that's constantly changing. But even with all this change, they haven't lost sight of their history and the individuals who helped shape the Rita Vereen into what it is today.
Absolutely. And that's clear in 2019 when they honor Jochen Wieriks, who had been a member for 66 years. He was awarded the first Somrijferscheid Dijk commemorative medal in recognition of his incredible dedication over the decades.
66 years, that's incredible. It really puts their 100-year history into perspective. And amidst all these celebrations, anniversaries, and changes, they introduced a new tradition in 2012, the Fahnenjunker.
Oh, yes. The Fahnenjunker is a younger member of the club who is chosen to care for the club's standard, a symbol of their history and their identity.
It's like a symbolic passing of the torch to the next generation to ensure those traditions continue. It's a beautiful way to honor the past while embracing the future. But speaking of the future, there's one question that keeps coming to mind. The Rita of Rain has seen so much change in the past 100 years, from wars and economic upheaval to societal shifts and technological advancements. What does their story tell us about the enduring appeal of equestrianism in a world that's becoming increasingly modern and technology-driven?
That's the big question, isn't it? Why does this connection between humans and horses still resonate, even in a world where horses aren't necessary for transportation or labor?
It makes you think. And maybe their story offers some clues. I mean, they've shown us that equestrianism can be much more than just riding. It can be about community. It can be about connecting to history and tradition. It can even be a way to find peace and purpose in a world that can feel pretty crazy at times.
It really can. It's about that special bond between humans and animals, a bond that goes back centuries. And maybe in a world that's so fast-paced and dominated by technology, that connection with nature and with tradition, that sense of grounding and purpose that you get from equestrianism, maybe it becomes even more important.
I think you're right. The Rita Vrain Büderich has shown us that some things, even in a world that's always changing, never go out of style. The love of horses, the importance of community, and the power of tradition. These are values that have resonated for generations, and they continue to resonate today.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the history of the Reader van Buren Buderich, it's important to remember that their story isn't over. They're still writing, still celebrating, still adapting to new challenges. Who knows what the future holds for them?
Well, I have a feeling they'll find a way to keep thriving, just as they have for the past century. Their story is truly an inspiration, and I think we can all learn something from their resilience, their dedication, and their passion for equestrianism.
It's been a pleasure exploring their story with you.
And to you, our listener, thank you for joining us on this fascinating deep dive into the heart of the writer Vereen Büderich. We hope you've enjoyed this journey through a century of history, tradition, and the enduring spirit of equestrianism. It's amazing, isn't it? This club, this little writer Vereen Büderich, has been through so much in the past 100 years. Wars, economic troubles, huge changes in society. They've seen it all, and yet they're still going strong.
It really shows you the power of community and tradition, especially when you combine that with a passion like they have for horses.
It makes you wonder, what is it about that connection with horses that people find so appealing? I mean, we're living in a world where horses aren't really essential anymore. We don't need them for transportation or work like we used to. So why are they still so important to us and clearly to the people of Büderich?
That's a question that goes way beyond just this one clip. It says something about being human, doesn't it?
It really does. Maybe looking at their story can help us understand a little better. The Reader Vereen has shown us that equestrianism isn't just about riding. It can bring people together. It can connect us to history and traditions. It can even be a way to find some peace and a sense of purpose in a world that can feel kind of crazy sometimes.
I think you're right. It's about that bond between people and animals, and that goes back centuries. And maybe now, when everything is so fast-paced and technology is everywhere, that connection to nature and tradition to something real that you get from horses, maybe that's even more important than ever.
I think that's a great point. The Reader Büderich proves that even in a world where everything seems to be changing all the time, some things never really go out of style. The love of horses, the importance of community, the strength of tradition, those things still matter. And they matter to people today, just like they did generations ago.
Absolutely. And as we finish our deep dive into their history, I think it's important to remember that this isn't the end of their story. The Reader Vereen is still out there. They're still writing, they're still celebrating, they're still figuring out how to adapt to whatever challenges come their way. Who knows what the future holds for them?
I have a feeling they'll find a way to thrive, just like they've done for the last 100 years. Their story is really inspiring. It reminds us how powerful resilience can be, and dedication and passion.
It's been great exploring this with you.
And to all of you listening, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey into the heart of the Rita Vereen Büderich. We hope you enjoyed exploring this century of history and tradition and the special connection between people and horses.